This is a Rattle and Hum Sports podcast for Friday, May the 17th, the year 2013. And my name is Bryan Houston, and we're talking Big 12 college sports right now with the Big 12 Insider Kevin Lonnquist. Kevin, how you doing?
I'm good, Bryan. How are you today?
Doing great. Thanks very much for coming on with us as always. Let's talk about some of the big news over the course of the last few days in the Big 12. First of all, I think the biggest news, TCU suspends defensive end DeVonte Fields for 2 ball games. That means he's going to miss the opener against LSU at Cowboy Stadium on August the 31st. And then I would think a certain victory against Southeastern Louisiana on September 7th. What do you make of all this? Because of what happened with Pa Hall, with the drug scandal, are we seeing Patterson's program kind of getting out from under him?
You know, I think a lot of people who are opponents of Gary would like to suggest that. Suspensions are, if you want to say, are commonplace in college athletics. They are, to an extent. It's just because it's really hard to keep track of 85 scholarship players and making sure that they're all doing the same thing. And you can get a good number of kids that will behave themselves and do what they're supposed to. Unfortunately, when you get these isolated incidents, it kind of speaks more about your program than really what the other, say, 80 to 80 forward kids are doing with what's going on. I think with the suspension, and again, we don't know what it is. There's a lot of internet and rumor mongering going on as to what it is, but we won't get into that. But the thing is, with Fields, obviously he's coming off an amazing freshman season where he was making all these freshman All-American teams, the Big 12 player, the defensive player of the year, just a dynamic player. And for him to pull a flat tire like this, to make the mistake, whatever that was, to warrant the 2-game suspension, really speaks of a kid who's not focused and determined to do what's necessary week in and week out to put himself in a good position. Obviously, it would have been a great thing for TCU to have him for the opener against LSU, because LSU's kind of going through a transition period with their offense and a lot of other things. And I think his presence on the team would have made it a little bit more interesting that night. I'm not saying that one guy completely changes the scope of the defense, but you and I both know too, Bryan, that there are certain impacting players, and DeVonte is developing into that. And it's a hard lesson he's going to learn, and you hope that he will take something from this and move forward with it. Now, as far as this being a trend because of what happened with the drug scandal in February of 2012, and then obviously the subsequent suspension of Casey Paul and then entering a substance abuse treatment program, those things are, they're going through a pretty rough time with them. And I think sometimes that when programs are starting to emerge as powers like TCU is, there's going to be some growing pains with it, and there are going to be some things because it's, sometimes you're just going to get kids who are coming from all walks of life, and some kids who are really good at playing football, maybe borderline academically, and just are influenced by the wrong types of people, and they just find a way to fall into that trap. And so that's the risk you run when you build a program. We read on the internet with all the major sports wires, CBS, ESPN, and whatnot, of kids getting suspended by football programs for whatever reason. And that's just kind of comes to the territory. Although I will say this, I do think some of the onus upon these kids, because you hear people saying, well, these kids think that they walk around like they think that they're God and so forth. But my point is that, yeah, that's true, and shame on them for doing it, but shame on us too, because we're the ones too that are promoting them and talking them up like they are the second coming. So if kids hear this a lot time after time, they're going to kind of believe it and think that they are untouchable, and then wind up doing things like whatever DeVonte Fields did to put them in this position.
Well, and the other thing, too, I was at a meeting last night where Chad Glasgow, the safeties coach for TCU, was on hand, and we were talking about it with some of the high school coaches that I was with, and it really, too, probably as a result of the previous problems that Coach Patterson had with some of his players, including Casey Pa Hall, that now he's in a position of having to go zero tolerance and take strong action against players, even when maybe in the past it might not have warranted it.
Yeah, and really, Gary's in a tough spot. He obviously has to walk a fine line with making sure that he ensures discipline and creates a culture of accountability within the program. But at the same time, there's pressure to win because he's making a big salary. They just put Amon Carter has basically been redone over the last 4 or 5 years. It's a beautiful facility now. It's top notch, and they're in a position where they're playing big time games. They're in a BCS conference now, so there's all that. So there's all the other things that come with that. So Gary's probably trying to figure out, how do I make sure that we can still maintain a very competitive football program that can compete for conference championships, potentially get into the national championship picture, if not the Big 12 championship picture, and making sure that we're getting kids that are doing the right thing. And that's a fine line to walk, because you know that when all these coaches are recruiting, and I don't care if it's TCU or if it's Texas or if it's Ole Miss or if it's USC, those coaches have to do great background checks on these kids, not only from an academic standpoint, but also from a personality standpoint. And so you can do everything you possibly can to vet this out, and you still may miss something, or you still might think that you can get it under control because you want to be Father Flanagan, that you can turn this kid's life around by putting him on your campus along with all these support networks, and they still will make the wrong decision. That's just kind of the way it works.
Well, we go from talking about maybe one of the best defensive players in the Big 12 to the Lott Impact Trophy. The nominees came out today, some 42 of them. 7 players from the Big 12 on that list, including 2 from Baylor that you're familiar with, Ahmad Dixon and Bryce Hager. Calvin Barnett from Oklahoma State, the defensive lineman. Cornerback Aaron Colvin from Oklahoma. Defensive end Jackson Jeffcoat from Texas, TCU cornerback Jason Verrett, and the Kansas State safety Ty Zimmerman. Of that group, who really stands out for you?
Well, I'm going to go with Verrett, Barnett, Jeffcoat, and Ahmad Dixon. That's no disrespect to the other kids, but those are the 4 that, Verrett had a great season. Remember, TCU secondary was pretty much beat up last year. But Jason really did a great job. He did a great job of locking down the top receivers for the other teams week after week, especially against Justin Brown of OU in the regular season finale. Jackson Jeffcoat, of course, Jackson went down with the torn pectoral muscle last year with the Longhorns, and so he missed all of the balance of the season. I think he's going to be motivated to put together a big season. I think he's going to have a great year, too, and he needs to. Texas is going to really get itself back into a competitive championship position. Ahmad Dixon with Baylor, that's kind of interesting because he was the nickelback in Phil Bennett's 4-2-5 alignment, but they moved him this spring to safety, which I think is a better position for him. At the nickelback, he was kind of doing a mix of coverage as well as run support, but in the safety position, he's going to be able to do a little bit more in terms of just roaming a little bit more around in center field and making plays. And Brian, he's just a kid that just has a nose for the football. And I think he's one of the reasons why I think Oklahoma State's going to be the preseason favorite to win the Big 12 this year.
Very good. Okay, now we move on to other news in the Big 12. This week it was revealed that Dan Beebe received nearly $5 million as he left as the Big 12 commissioner, according to some conference tax documents. He resigned back in 2011 after a lot of teams, 4 teams, left the conference over the course of a 2 or 3 year period. Nebraska, Colorado, A&M, and Missouri. That's a lot of money to pay somebody to fail and leave. What do you think?
Well, I kind of think that that's actually, if you look at the grand scheme of things with college athletics and the big amounts of money that are being paid, I actually think that that's a nominal amount that Dan Beebe got. Look at it from this point. This is, to me, I look at this as no different in corporate America, where a CEO of a major company is either being encouraged to be successful somewhere else and has moved out because company profits have been down for 4 successive quarters or something to that effect. And so he's given his going-away balloon package to jump ship. And I think that's probably what, so I find the correlation with that as far as Beebe is concerned. He put the conference in a very difficult position because he yielded too much and and basically he was accused, fair or unfair, of being lackey for Texas. And really, he was just in a position where he was not a leader. He was not in a position of strength where he could not guide the conference through the waters that it was in. That said, you can't just fire him because he could turn around and sue you. So there's probably behind the deals there were some negotiations about the exit fee of how we make this a nice going-away package one without publicly making it knowledge until on down the line. I don't think it's that big of a story. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think that's just kind of the way it works. And, college coaches are getting paid $5.5 million a year, like Matt Brown is at Texas and Nick Saban is at Alabama. So my comparison, I don't think it's that big of a deal because think about the mega conference deal, television deal that the Big 12 just signed. They probably made that up already once they signed the contract last year.
Yeah, and we're going to the what you were mentioning about the price of college football coaches these days, and we talk about the amount of money that guys like Mac Brown and Nick Saban are making, and there was a Forbes article that came out that suggested that maybe Nick Saban was underpaid, and their thinking was, and I agree with it, since Nick Saban has come along, it's been worth about $50 million to Alabama because the enrollment has increased, the profile of the athletic department is unquestioned, 3 national championships in the last 4 years, and then as a result of that, they see this huge jump in kids wanting to go to school at Alabama. So it means a huge amount of money for a university when you have a very successful athletic program. So I think it's just the price of doing business in college football. Now, on the other hand, with Mac's situation, his program has been down for a few years, and he continues to either get raises or maintain a pretty nice salary right now. But there's no question that program makes a huge amount of money for the school and for the athletic department.
Sure, and you mentioned a few moments ago where when your football program is doing really, really well, and that's kind of like the front porch of the house of a university. And that's how I look at it from an overall standpoint. When your football program is doing well, that gives the alumni a lot of pride. That means donations go up, your endowment goes up, your applications to get into school go up. That also creates more of an opportunity to bring more professors onto your campus. And so there's a lot of things that help the academic world, even though it's just not talked about it to a great extent. I mean, all you have to do is look at another example. All you have to do is look over at TCU, where their program took off. Their enrollment numbers have skyrocketed. They've had incredible reach into the state of California with applications and kids wanting to come over to Fort Worth and go to school there, and their endowment is going up. Plus the fact TCU is taking on huge natural gas wells, so they're getting a lot of revenue off of that. But that being said, that's where it really helps. So for people who will poo-poo athletic success as far as maybe devaluing the importance of your academic experience at a university, people have to also understand too that if your program is doing well, then it gets more people wanting to be a part of things, and that's where money comes in different forms, different parts of the university.
It is a big, big business. But back to Dan Beebe, I sure wish somebody would pay me $5 million to go away.
Yeah, that's very true. We'd all love for that, wouldn't we?
Most of the time it looks like I'm the one paying when they want me to go away. So, all right, baseball. It's hard to keep up with, obviously because of all the games and so forth. But now we're getting down to the nitty-gritty. The top 8 teams in the Big 12 make the Big 12 postseason tournament. And shockingly, one of the storied programs in the history of college baseball, the Texas Longhorns, are not going to be among the top 8 teams in the Big 12 this year. 26-23 overall, 6-16 in the conference this year with a loss to TCU this week. They were eliminated. The nightmare, the long drought for the Longhorns just continues to go on across the board in their athletic department.
Yeah, it's kind of it's cyclical and it happens, but it seems like it just caught up with Texas all in the same year. Basketball had a very poor year under Rick Barnes, and now he's being hit with transfers with Sheldon McClellan and Julian Lewis, one of their other top players who's leaving the program. He's lost some huge players off that team. The women's basketball program had a really rough year under their new coach, and now baseball. The thing about the Texas baseball team is that it hasn't been an issue for them pitching there. I think they were top 10 of the nation with team ERA. They had zero offense throughout the season, and that really put a lot of pressure on their pitching staff. And sometimes when that happens, then the pitching staff starts to crack. And it is shocking to see Texas not involved in the Big 12 tournament. but then again, we started to see this coming last year when Texas didn't make the NCAA tournament field. And there's a lot of questions about Augie's tenure there. Should he resign? He says he's not going to, that he's determined to get this thing turned around and so forth. I don't know if that's really going to be his decision to make, even though DeLoss has publicly come out and said that he's backed Augie. But nonetheless, it's really kind of shocking to see it all come crashing down on Texas at the same time in the same year. Now, football kind of was okay at 9-4. They won the bowl game against Oregon State in the Alamo Bowl, although I don't think people were expecting them to play in the Alamo Bowl, which is a secondary bowl. But you know where I'm going with this. It's just the expectations at Texas have been so high, and they enjoyed the good life in the mid to late 2000s, the aughts, I should say. And now they've just kind of reached the point where everything's just kind of bottomed out. And you're starting to actually see that, too, on the recruiting front, where when football recruits are being offered by Texas, they kind of look at it as saying, I got offered by Texas, as opposed to maybe saying 5 years ago, yeah, I got offered by Texas. So there's just that perception that Texas is in kind of a malaise right now, and I don't know how long it's going to last, but obviously if the football team has a bounce back year next year, that might be able to set the tone and start turning things around. We'll have to wait and see how that plays out.
But it's just amazing when you think about the amount of money in that program, and the coaches are among the highest paid in all of their sports, to get the lack of results they've gotten here in the last couple of years. And you wonder just how much longer the folks, the powers that be at the University of Texas are going to be willing to pay that kind of price for coaches and get so little bang for their buck as they've gotten in the last 2 or 3 years.
Well, there's something to be said for that. I hear what you're saying, Brian. I agree with you to an extent. But if you want to compete for the best, you're in a system now where you're going to have to pay, maybe overpay, if you want to get a coach that you think is going to take your program to the next level or maintain its top level. But that's kind of throwing money at a problem, if you will, isn't going to get your way out of it. Spending your way out of a problem is not going to be the way to do it. We've seen that in Washington quite a bit over the last few years, but that's another story. But I'll give you another example. Is if you look at in the professional ranks, if you look at the Los Angeles Angels of Anaheim, they have huge contracts with Albert Pujols and Josh Hamilton and C.J. Wilson and a couple of other guys. And that team is sitting about 10 games under 500. And you think the Angels management, with all that money committed to those top-level players who are not either A, performing or hurt or whatever, where the chemistry is not working very well, do you think they're waking up right now every day out there with a team that's basically on the verge of being out of it by June 1st, saying, what did we get ourselves into? And so with Texas, there might be a little bit of that thinking, but at the time when Mac kept getting extended, during his great run, everyone said, great, we get to keep him for a few years. But then, of course, when a couple of down years hit them, they're like, gosh, we're overpaying for Mac Brown. It's just a perception thing, and that's going to be the same thing that it's Rick Barnes. I personally think for Rick Barnes, that he's probably got this year to make a move, or he's going to be on his way out the door.
Now, I can't disagree with you on that one. And I know the heat is getting turned up under Mac as well, but I would think it's going to have to take a 3-win season or something like that to have him actually, be jettisoned from his position.
Well, I always look at it like this: contracts with coaches and or players, or whatever level of sports you're talking about, but in the college ranks, the coaches, those contracts are as good as their buyout clauses are, and so those buyout clauses are executed.
You're absolutely right. One other thing, I don't want to throw you a curve on this, and we won't get into real big details about it, but the Big 12 right now, with the advent of the college football playoff, the Big 12 now trying to work out some new bowl tie-ins. And the two things that strike me about this thing is that, number one, they want to try to get into a bowl game in Florida. Number two, it could mean the end of the Big 12's alliance with the Holiday Bowl. The Holiday Bowl has been one of the great bowls in the history of the Big 12, and before that, for Southwest Conference teams, kind of hate to see that one go away. What's the thinking there? And I mean, I get why you'd want to get into one of the Florida Bowl games because it's closer to New Year's Day. And higher profile, but the Holiday Bowl has been a big friend to the Big 12 for a long time.
It has, and you make a good point, but I kind of think you answered your own question there, because the Holiday Bowl is great, but look, you've got 10 teams that have to travel at least 1,200 miles, if not 1,400 miles, just to get to San Diego for the game. And it's 2 time zones away. It's going to be a late kickoff. So when that game kicks off on usually the 28th or 29th of December, it's going to be about a 8 or 9 o'clock start back here in the Central Time Zone. So I think the thinking is on that one. It's been a great partner. There have been some great games. The one game that comes to my mind was when the Texas rallied to beat Washington in a bowl game about 6-7 years ago with Major Applewhite. That was I think it was like 47-43 win over Washington. But this is the way the bowl things work out. I mean, the Big 12 is likely going to get away from the Pinstripe Bowl up in the Bronx after that snowstorm that West Virginia was involved in. That just didn't work out for them. They were fortunate that West Virginia was the bowl team for there. But the Capital One Bowl makes a lot of sense. Now, that would mean that the Big Ten's end of that tenure in that bowl game would end. But see, the other thing is that the Big 12 is obviously trying to get that market to get into that New Year's Day bowl game there in Orlando, and also they're trying to get into one of the Tennessee Bowls, the Music City Bowl in Nashville, which would give them greater exposure. And again, a lot of these bowls, they're trying to put themselves in a position where they're more regional, so their fans can travel to them. It's a lot easier to get in the car, drive to Nashville, although it's a little bit of a drive if you're driving from Austin or if you're driving from Lubbock or whatever. But it's a little bit, but it seems more doable than trying to figure out how to get to San Diego and paying for airfare, because that's a 2-day drive out there. You can do Lubbock to Nashville. It's going to be a long drive, but it's certainly a little bit easier than trying to go through, three big states in New Mexico, Arizona, and then all the parts of Southern California just to get to San Diego.
Well, let me just ask a dumb question. Why can't you try to keep both? Get to Florida and keep San Diego?
Well, I just think that that's part of the reason why they just want to align themselves with bowls where they are going to be more geographically friendly for their fan bases to travel. So I think that really is what it comes down to.
Well, having lived in Chattanooga for a few years, let me tell you, December in Nashville can be a little dicey as opposed to December in San Diego. But they got to make those decisions, so fair enough. One last thing, Larry Brown. The Nets job is open. Larry Brown, likes to move about every other year when it comes to basketball coaching, and he's coached just about every NBA team on the planet and half the colleges. If he was to be offered the Nets job, and no one's saying he will be because at his age, that becomes problematic, but there's no question that his history as a winner. If he was to be offered the Nets job, what would be the likelihood that he'd stay at SMU?
That's a tough call because, Larry's got a great recruiting class coming in for SMU. I think the Rivals rated SMU's class with the late addition of Keith Frazier, the guard out of Dallas Kimball, as I think 14th out of their top 30 classes. And I think, for me personally, I would find that hard to believe that Larry would want to walk away from that program after putting the things in place. But again, this is Larry Brown. He is a basketball coaching nomad, where he never met a job offer he didn't like or take. And so this is what SMU signed up for when they announced his hiring a year ago, April. They know that he has this history of moving around. His family's all back east. He grew up in New York City, so this would be a chance to return home and potentially, because of his tenure with the New York Knicks, which was a one-year walking disaster. I think they were like 26 and 52 or 26 and 56 or something like that. They were just awful. And I think from his standpoint that he might want to return to New York and put himself with a better, for a legacy building standpoint, at least from a New York specific standpoint, that he might want to end on better terms there. But but then again, maybe 73 with all the NBA traveling. I mean, you're starting training camp in September. Your season gets started in late October. You're going all the way through April. Whereas the college season is a little bit more condensed. The difference is that you have more say in the players that you want. And so the question for Larry is at 73, and I'm not trying to say that that his age is really wearing him down and he can't do it. I'm not suggesting that at all. But I think there's a part of me that says that I think he would stay at SMU for two reasons. One, he doesn't want to deal with the NBA travel anymore because you could be in New York City one night, and then you could be out on the West Coast the next night. Whereas opposed with the new conference and SU going into with the likes of H. Perdiccio in Louisville and Connecticut and so forth, he would have an opportunity to try and build the program there. And I think there's a part for Larry that he would want to take to at least put the program in a better position before he transitions it off to a Tim Jankovich. I've said to people before that if you get Larry for 2 years, that's great. If he sticks for a third, that's a bonus year. So I would like to think that he would stay for one more year just to see where it is. But again, it is Larry Brown, so nothing is ever certain.
What's coming up for you for Rattle and Hump Sports?
We'll have some reaction to some of the latest things that went on with the Big 12 this week. Obviously, Texas baseball, not making the Big 12 tournament. We'll just have some reaction to that. We'll have some reaction to some of the other players that are transferring from the program, things of that nature.
Very good. Kevin, great talking to you as always.
Thanks, Brian.
All right, Kevin Lonnquist, the Big 12 Insider for Rattle and Hump Sports. I'm Bryan Houston. This is a Rattle and Hump Sports podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.